please help me welcome our president, Josh Welsh, writer-director Jeff Nichols, and actors Ruth Negga and Joel Edgerton.
And all this milk for us to drink,
That's right.
Oh, awesome.
if you're thirsty.
A box of water.
Cool.
I am so happy to be sitting up here with you guys. It is just such a beautiful, enormously powerful film. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give it up. I'm going to ask, we'll have a conversation and then open it up to a couple questions from the house as well. But just to start it off, Jeff, if you could talk just what led you to the Lovings and to wanting to make a film about them?
Sure. Well, in 2012, three of the producers approached me. It was Jed Doherty and Colin Firth with their company Rain Dog Films, and Nancy Bursky, who had made the documentary The Loving Story. They approached me with Nancy's documentary. In fact, the first thing they sent me was the trailer for that documentary. And immediately, I was floored. I sent the link to the trailer to my wife because I was traveling. I said, they want me to turn this into a narrative film. What do you think? And she just wrote back, if you don't do this, I'll divorce you. So I watched the documentary, and you know, a few things, you know, mostly just the connection that you have to the real Richard and Mildred immediately from this footage is undeniable. You know, there's this glow that's coming off of Mildred, literally out of this archival footage when she speaks, this elegance and this beauty. And then on the flip side of that coin, you have Richard, who is just crushed by being on camera and just totally unable to articulate what he's feeling. And that I just found that so fascinating and honestly attractive in the sense that there was a sincerity that was undeniable, but also because I didn't know about it. I hadn't heard this story, and that made me angry. I was upset that this wasn't on the lips of every American in 2012 when we're going state by state fighting for marriage equality rights. You know, why isn't this a fundamental part of our American history? And I got mad.
So my next question, so this was 2012 when you saw the doc and started the development process. So can you talk a little bit more about just the development process of getting the script?
Sure. Well, so immediately after watching the documentary, I had a point of view, which wasn't that hard to come to if you watch the doc. It was that, okay, I want to sit with those two beautiful people for 2 hours. I want to know what they were doing in their day-to-day life. I want to see around the edges of this documentary footage, around this archival footage, and just see, just off the edge of that screen, what their lives were like. And with that, though, comes a few rules, meaning if they didn't go to the oral arguments of the Supreme Court, we don't get to go. We don't get to watch the machinations of this very fascinating court case make its way up to the Supreme Court because they didn't have that point of view. And so already you're setting in motion a narrative structure that that's really specific and a little odd. And so the first thing I did was I called the producers and said, look, because this was kind of on the heels of the Help coming out, and I said, I think you guys have a very commercial, feel-good movie possibly hanging out there. I'm not going to make that. And you all need to be really honest with yourselves about who you're hiring. But from the beginning, they said, of course, it's about these people. And I found support there. So I got on a plane and went to Virginia. And I went with Nancy and Jed Doherty. And the first person we met was Peggy Loving, who is the only surviving child of the Lovings. The two older boys have died. And, I was looking for really specific details, like was there music in the home? what was the day-to-day life like with Mildred? And she's much like her father. She just plays it really close to the vest, and she would just smile and nod at me. And so I realized, okay, and to her credit, I mean, she was 5 years old in '67 when the court case came down. So she wasn't even born until they were in D.C. for a year or two. So, there's a limited perspective there. And so I just tried to draw as much as I could, one off of Nancy's documentary. She sent me this hard drive that had all of the outtakes of the archival footage, as well as all of her complete interviews, all of those outtakes. So it was like someone just dropping 4 years of research into your lap. Wow. Combined with this visit to Virginia, which I don't want to underestimate its impact, where I went to the courthouse that they were tried in, which is in the movie. The jail outside that they were held in, which is in the movie. The home that they lived in hiding in, which was about 3 minutes away from the field where Richard proposes to her in the movie. I started to absorb this place that was such an integral part of Mildred. Her decision to move her family back into the countryside out of D.C. under threat of arrest or much, much worse. Why would any rational person make that decision? But once you're there, it starts to seep into your bones a little bit. It's not fake. It really has a feeling to it. And when you add family and when you add that sense of home that she had, it kind of became undeniable, which was important for me because you're building out this narrative and you immediately start playing devil's advocate. Like, what's the big deal? DC's 2 hours away, but it could have been another planet for her. And it was important to go there and feel that specificity.
Ruth and Joel, I mean, your performances are so astonishing, and there's such intimacy. I feel like a huge part of the power of this film comes from the fact that the audience, we're falling in love with the two of you and with the broader family, and just being able to spend that much time with you and with the friends and family. It's such an intimate film in that way. And I don't know, I'd love to hear, I mean, just jumping into the middle a bit, but what was the working process like? How did you create that on set? Did you have rehearsal time? How did you find that, how did you build that? How did you do that?
I don't know. Well, I think, we both fell in love with Mildred and Richard too. Both as individuals, but also as a couple. I don't see how you can't, because, and I echo Jeff when he says, Nancy's documentary, The Loving Story, for HBO was really invaluable to us. And I think we were all really enchanted by this couple. And their love for each other, and I think that we really, really wanted to recreate that as much as possible. So we didn't really have a choice. I don't know. I think that I felt like when we were filming, there was this really special sort of alchemy. Everything just seemed to be right. And that doesn't happen very often. But also, I think that Jeff works with a lot of the same people in his films, and they're all people that he trusts. And I think that we are sort of, we all prepared. There's a lot of prep work that goes in. It's graft, essentially. It's not just, divine inspiration necessarily. A lot of work goes into that. And I think that, that might not seem too magical, but and so when you get to filming, a lot of that work is done. So whatever happens between action and cut, it really is like a leap of faith, and trusting in the work that you've done, but also knowing that everyone else has done the work, and you feel buoyed by that energy and is very supported. So I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's a very easeful experience working with Jeff and his team. One of my most favorite experiences ever.
There's something really special about the screenplay that Jeff wrote here, and I think point of view is a really, really good thing to talk about, and was a really good guide for us. I mean, for a start, you know, in general, it felt to me like the mantra coming out of Jeff, without really being spoken, was that he was telling a true story truthfully, which is also very rare, as I think everybody here would know. You know, like, this is a true story. However, we're gonna throw a few spices on top just to make it a movie experience. But the true story was so much more interesting. And I think it says a lot, and it was, you know, this is speaking to our working process, is that it feels to me like the movie is an invitation into having an empathetic experience with two human beings. And rather than going to that courtroom drama, that Jeff's choice to just sort of welcome you into the home, and not just the home that they wanted to live in, but the homes that they didn't want to live in because of their exile. And to watch that domestic dance between two people who, without words, often just knew when to support each other, knew who was taking the lead and when to follow, and watch them just try and eke out their life and eke out their existence with family while battling this monolithic structure of the law that seems so sort of impenetrable and immovable. And so the detail was all there. The minutiae of the detail of life was so there that, and there's no real sense with Jeff's screenplays and his approach to his work, like, this is like a rough guide and we'll work it out on the day. Like, there's specificity there that you feel very safe with a man who's put together all the building blocks that you don't need to deviate from. And it makes the work experience as an actor very, very good, because as much as those margins are set, there's great freedom within those margins. And almost ironically, the more specific, the more freedom.
Well, and really quickly, just to brag on them about process. I mean, Joel hit the ground in Virginia and started taking, masonry classes to the point to where he could lay a row of brick quite capably by the end. And you have...
I'm horrible.
And you have Ruth, going to sleep every night in her hotel room with an audio file of Mildred plugged into her ears and sleeping to this voice. I mean, you can't overestimate the amount of work that these two people did in terms of the mechanics of it. I'll brag on them. They won't brag on themselves. But.
I did want to ask you about, in casting this, I mean, this is such a quintessentially American story, and it's really interesting to me that in your two leads, you reached outside the country.
He still doesn't know. He's got a terrible ear for
people
accents.
keep saying this. I'm confused. That's a Boston accent, and yours is New England? I'm from the South. I don't ever leave. I don't know what people talk like in other parts of the country.
I mean, how did you do your casting and arrive at this incredible combination?
Well, Ruth was the first, and it really was like she just kind of fell out of the sky, into our laps. That's the way it felt to me, at least. Probably different for her. But Francine Maisler, our casting director that I've worked with since Mud, we had a casting session. I was out here doing some prep work for Midnight Special, and she said, well, let's just meet a few people. I want to show you a few people. And Ruth was the first person to walk in the door. And I wasn't familiar with her work. I didn't know she was Irish. And she sat down, and I mean, it was immediately recognizable to me that she had started the work, which her posture changed. Her mouth pursed in this way that immediately I was like, that's Mildred. And then this voice came out, that was Mildred. When she left the room, I turned to Francine and Sarah, my producing partner, and I just said, well, we don't have to see anybody else. I think we had some other people scheduled, so we did actually see like 3 other people, but that was just to be polite. And as we went on and looked for financing, I had a QuickTime video of that audition, and whenever anyone would ask, you know, who's Mildred, and I'd say, well, it's Ruth. So that was easy. That was remarkably easy. And then Joel and I were working on Midnight Special together, and again, I start to look at this facility that he has for voice. He was playing a Texas State Trooper in that film, and I just immediately recognized that if I gave this person all of this archival footage, man, what could he do with it? You know, I think he'd be able to really absorb this character, and so that became a very, very easy decision too.
You know, I want to go back just to the intimacy of the filmmaking. There's obviously lots of different ways this story could be told and different lenses you could do, and you know, you've focused so much on family and telling the story through an intimate couple, through a love story. Was that your approach from the beginning, or did you ever have a moment where you know, and where we see the civil rights movement is through little snippets on TV, but the kind of standard tropes, the way of showing that era in film, are totally absent here. Was that your decision from the beginning, or did it take you a while to find that?
No, it was. From the minute I finished watching the documentary the first time, that was the approach. But you know, even today, just speaking about it, if someone challenges me to try and enunciate the complexity and the importance of the civil rights movement, I get nervous. Like, there are better people for that task. But I felt like I knew these people, and I felt like I understood what they were feeling, because you can see it in this footage. But also, I just felt like I knew people like this. They weren't dealing with the same circumstances by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, Richard very much reminded me of my grandfather, and honestly, Mildred reminded me of my grandmother in her relationship with a man that was so stoic. You know, when you're married to a man like that, I feel like the woman in that relationship has to become the emotional voice of the family. My grandmother certainly was that, and that was Mildred. But beyond just being the emotional voice of the family, she was the voice that pushed this case toward the Supreme Court in this very elegant way. So yeah, that approach just felt right from the beginning. It felt most representational of who these people were.
You mentioned earlier that you shot in some of the locations. You were shot in Virginia at some of the actual locations, like the courthouse. How was that? I mean, I would imagine that informed the film greatly and added weight to it. But
sure.
How was the community there? Was it supportive when you were there filming? And
well, you guys can speak to that a little bit if you want to.
I think there was a great amount of support. Definitely the place itself offers up so much, just sort of, you know, abstract things. I know watching, you know, not that we shot in the graveyard, but Jeff took us to where Richard and Mildred are buried side by side, and that was quite an experience. And watching Ruth standing in the field, it kind of like suddenly clicked into my head how much of a privilege, responsibility and honor it was to take on the challenge of bringing the two of them to life. And it really lifted things for me, watching how important and how connected I saw she was to it. In terms of the community, I do in a cheeky way think that oftentimes when there's an idea of when people are polarized about an idea, and when you're talking about this story, and things have evolved in the human race as slowly as we do, as communities evolve and change and allow change to happen, as clunky and slow as it is, compared to, say, technology, which happens to change very quickly. But ideas move very slowly. And when they do move, it seems like everybody's got their arm around the right side of change. And so I wondered oftentimes about everybody going, this is a great story, and we're right behind this, and we're so proud of this story. And I'm sure the people that were on the wrong side of change weren't coming out of the woodwork, but you definitely felt like a real positive spirit there, emanating from people in the place.
Yeah, I mean, to walk in their footsteps was it was incredibly moving, and the energy was very potent. I mean, I'm a big believer in like places having like vibrating energetically, and you did. I could feel that. I could feel, you know, Richard and Mildred's legacy in these places, because for Mildred, home was woven into her very being. You know, the earth of Virginia was such an integral part of her being, her soul. So to be expelled, to not be able to raise her family there, was like killing a part of her. And so to have the opportunity to film in Virginia, which is so beautiful, and it brought it all closer, and which very much helped and informed our performances. And it was, yeah, I think that it's such a, you know, you see it in the film, you know, when she's in Washington, there's a melancholy sort of fog that descends on her, and then, you know, beautifully shot by Adam Stone, when she steps out of the car into, you know, her feet touch the grass and the earth, and you just see, you know, the light, you can just see, like, I kind of understood that it all fell away as soon as she came home. And, you know, as Jeff said, you know, to risk that, coming home in secret, it did mean, it meant, it was like starving her of oxygen, not having her home. So it was really, really crucial filming there.
That's great. I did want to ask about, so Jeff, you are well known as a lover of celluloid. I think all your features you've shot on film. And I'd love you to talk just a little bit about that. Yes, celluloid. You know, over 5 features, has that process has it changed? Has it gotten easier or harder? Have you discovered new things in it that you like even more, or that frustrate you?
Well, I know just technically, we only had 2 film stocks to choose from, so that simplified that process. Do we shoot on the night stuff or the day stuff? We'll shoot on the day stuff. It's daytime. But you know, it's such an interesting relationship, because my first film we shot for $48,000, and I couldn't afford to send the film off to be processed. I had an office in the back of my dad's furniture store, and I remember we wrapped that film after about 22 days, and there were just boxes of Fuji film stock sitting all around me, just slowly turning to vinegar, waiting for me to go get another job so I could afford to send it off and get it processed. I was asking Adam Stone, who shot all 5 of my films, in the middle of Shotgun Stories, my first film, I said, how do you think it's going? And he just went, which is very telling of Adam Stone's personality. So in a way, it's gotten drastically easier in the fact that, you know, I can actually look at the footage. But for this, you know, there was just never really a question for us. Panavision has been really great to us. This G series lenses that they have, we've used on Mud, Midnight Special, and now Loving. It's a system that we're very comfortable with, Adam and I. And you know, no names to be mentioned, but I've seen period pieces recently that haven't been shot on film, and I don't buy them. I think suspension of disbelief is a very, very important thing, and it's a very precious thing that we as filmmakers hold in our hands. And I just don't see how you tell this story not on celluloid. It just takes everything and skews it to reality in my mind. Until you go home and watch it on your new TV, and there's an overscan rate that makes it look like a soap opera. But yeah, you know, film also, I don't know if they would speak to this way, but for me, I know it makes me sit up and focus. I did a calculation on Shotgun Stories that we were spending about $365 a minute every time that film camera was running. And that was my family's money, that was my money. And to this day, when I hear I think about it, and people have to show up to work, and they have to focus, and it doesn't feel as disposable, which affects the process. Not to mention just the weight of the camera, what you do. I'm a bit of a classicist when it comes to the way I approach directing, especially this film, and the movement of that camera is very important. And I want my films to have that weight, and that weight is given to you by film.
I think we have time. I just want to ask one last question, which is, you know, when you started writing the script, I don't think you could have anticipated where we would be today with this election at this moment in American history. And obviously, you have not made some ham-fisted political film here. It's very personal, but I'm curious how you feel, all of you actually, with this film coming out at this moment, with what's going on and where we are in the conversation. Is there anything you want to say about the film in that context, or does the film speak for itself?
Sorry, we've been in press all day.
Rub your eyes.
And they've heard my, can I give I'll just give the answer.
Do it.
It's very eloquent.
I truly believe this stuff. It just, after you say it 100 times in a day, it starts to feel, I think equality is an idea, and I think it's something that we never really achieve as a society. I think it's something that we're always working toward, and I think it's the responsibility of every generation to hold that idea up and decide what you want to look like and how you want to define it, and so that in 10, 20, 30 years, how are people going to look back on us right now and judge us in relation to our definition of equality? And what Richard and Mildred do is they are guides for us. They show us how to have this conversation. They don't show us the end result, but they show us how to have the conversation. It changes the tenor of it when you think about the people at the center of these things. And it is an important reminder, especially in a political season, because whether you have your religious platform, your political platform, that has nothing to do with people's lives. And I think that's what their story does, and that's what people need to be reminded of.
Well, you guys, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. Congratulations on a fantastic film, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please join us out in the lobby. We're going to have a reception. Let's eat and drink. Thank you.